Today's latest news. The homeless people on the streets of Chicago have completely disappeared without a trace. What happened?
As North Park homeless encampment was clear, residents say they have nowhere to go.
But you can see behind me just the tearing down of these encampments along the river here. Almost everything is finished up.
There has been a lot of more vehicles that are labeled ICE. They've seen more ICE agents, but as of arrests, we don't know.
Safety became a concern after the fire department responded to 3 fires this summer and 5 total this year.
ICE just conducted a raid in parallel with the refugee resettlement campaign in Chicago. In just a few hours, the people who once lived there were suddenly gone. An elderly woman was searched while still in her pajamas. A father in handcuffs being escorted from the refugee camp. The makeshift tents were flattened, leaving the sidewalks bare and clean, as if no humanitarian earthquake had just occurred. For many residents, this site could be a bright spot in their days of living with vice and darkness. But for others, it's a nightmare of homelessness unleashed, where fear, helplessness, and despair occupy every corner of life. In today's video, we'll delve into the voids left by this campaign. Not just the bare concrete, but also the agonizing questions about human dignity, justice, and responsibility. Can a society that claims to be humane continue to stand by and watch the most vulnerable people being driven out? Let's find the answer in the next 20 minutes. If Illinois is like a body, then Chicago is the bleeding heart. Nowhere else in the state has suffered such a severe crisis. In just one night in January, nearly 19,000 people in Chicago became homeless, a number 3 times higher than the same period in 2023. It might sound hard to imagine, but picture a shadow town that has sprung up right in the heart of the city, 5 times the size of Skid Row in Los Angeles. This has led to countless consequences that are difficult to overcome. Schools have been forced to close, supermarkets are empty of customers, and the streets are left with only makeshift shacks and empty faces, homeless, without dreams, and with no faith left to move forward. According to a report by the US Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, the homeless population in Illinois skyrocketed from 11,947 to 25,832 people in just 1 year. In Chicago alone, a 91% increase pushed the homeless population to 18,836, making the city one of the 3 largest metropolitan areas in the United States with the highest number of homeless individuals. Of these, over 13,600 are new faces, migrant families and asylum seekers, who make up a significant portion of Illinois' total homeless population. That sudden increase caused temporary shelters to spring up like weeds after rain, turning many streets into shadow towns right in the heart of the city. That space was thick with the stench of pollution and waste, strewn with human excrement, and illegal substances permeated every corner, compounded by intractable mental health issues. Those who live here face crime, violence, and the risk of both physical and mental harm, especially women and the elderly, who are vulnerable in a dangerous environment. Behind that is a paradox. Many of those homeless immigrants were once people who came to Chicago hoping for a fresh start. However, when they enter the city as asylum seekers or undocumented immigrants, they often do not have the right to work legally. The procedures lasted for months, even years, making it impossible for them to earn enough to pay rent, and they quickly fell into homelessness. More seriously, aggressive raids by ICE, along with campaigns like Operation Midway Blitz, have instilled further fear of deportation. That fear prevents many people from entering public shelters, forcing them to hide deep within makeshift tents on the sidewalks. The cycle of homelessness is therefore tightening, making it difficult to escape. But perhaps, instead of rushing to judgment behind the label of illegal, we should try to look at them from a different perspective. They, the homeless immigrants, whether legal or not, are just people seeking an opportunity, a home, and a normal life like anyone else. However, opportunity doesn't knock twice, and for those who have lost everything, the path back is even more treacherous. They try to start over, but their progress is constantly blocked by rising house prices and oppressive social injustices. And the tragedy didn't stop there. As personal misfortune gradually turned into concrete policy, the city chose to eliminate the temporary camps on the sidewalks, effectively pushing the homeless out of the last refuge they had left to cling to. So, where does the true line lie between justice and cruelty when a city chooses to flatten the makeshift tents of its own citizens? Let's find the answer in the next part. In just a short morning, Chicago, a prosperous city accustomed to a noisy and chaotic pace of life, suddenly took on an unusual stillness. But that rare tranquility quickly vanished as ICE simultaneously launched an immigration raid alongside the removal of temporary homeless encampments from the streets. Within hours, both the homeless and undocumented immigrants were rounded up like criminals. The image of long lines of people with their heads bowed, hands clasped tightly, silently following ICE agents has become an unforgettable and haunting memory for those who witnessed it firsthand. Tents, clothes, personal belongings, and even ID cards, all were swept away without a trace. The homeless are not allowed to keep anything, because everything that remains from that difficult life to the city is just urban waste that needs to be disposed of. Each camp that is leveled and re-etched creates another blurred line between the homeless and criminals. As the tents disappeared, the dignity of the people inside them was pushed closer to the darkness of discrimination, where poverty was gradually viewed with the same eyes as sin. Fear not only gripped the temporary tents, but also spread to nearby residential areas, where ICE vehicles were seen appearing and parked sporadically on many streets. However, data on arrests, identities, or charges is vague, creating a gap filled with speculation and a chilling effect within the immigrant communities in Pilsen, Little Village, etc. On forums like Reddit, many residents argue that these enforcement measures don't address the root of the problem and may even worsen the situation. Each camp that is cleared only makes way for another to spring up elsewhere, while the city's budget continues to be eroded. Many people still reassure themselves that deporting illegal immigrants will open up more job opportunities for American citizens. But the reality is harsh. With relief centers constantly overwhelmed, even Americans seeking help were turned away and forced back onto the streets. So, in the end, whose interests are we protecting? The city's solution: place the homeless in shelters with support staff. However, how many people truly want to enter a place where they have to live with the fear of losing their belongings, being robbed, sleeping on bug-infested beds, and sacrificing their privacy? It's ironic that the place called the last resort has become a solution that many people cannot accept. Fairness and freedom, values once considered fundamental, are now gradually becoming a luxury. Whether you're a US citizen or an immigrant, if you're poor, it seems you have no chance from the start of keeping your home. Not to mention, the initial goal was to arrest illegal immigrants and enforce federal law. But the consequences exceeded expectations. The community spiraled into fear, personal property was swept away, and the city faced social, economic, and political tensions. In other words, a seemingly clear legal action leaves behind complex social consequences right in the heart of the city. So, are we sacrificing human dignity just for a fleeting sense of order? And if fairness and freedom have become a privilege, how many more people will be left on the margins of the American dream? A city is not only measured by its skyscrapers or dazzling billboards, but also by the vitality of its streets, its small shops, and its communities that have been connected for generations. But as ICE sweeps cleared homeless encampments and simultaneously sowed fear within the immigrant community, the local economic foundation was also shaken violently. The emptiness on the streets is not just physical space, but also gaps in cash flow, in trust, and in the normal functioning of a city. Try stepping into a bustling Chicago commercial district in the days following the crackdown. The small restaurant no longer has regular customers, the grocery store's revenue has been halved, and the bustling markets are now sparsely populated. Because of an undeniable reality, immigration, whether legal or not, has been and continues to play a role in the local economy. When ICE appeared with images of handcuffs and agent vehicles, many people, out of fear, disappeared from public life. And when they disappear, purchasing power, cash flow, and stability in the neighborhoods also decline simultaneously. According to a report by the Economic Policy Institute, immigrants make up about 17% of the workforce in Illinois, with the majority concentrated in essential industries such as food service, construction, and healthcare. That number shows their undeniable role in maintaining the local economy. However, due to strict enforcement policies, many workers have gone underground, leading to a severe labor shortage. From family restaurants to construction sites, the labor gaps left behind are not easily filled. At another level, the city budget is also under pressure. The cost for each raid, for travel, management, and cleaning up the camps is not small. Meanwhile, the effectiveness is almost entirely temporary. Today the camp is flattened. Tomorrow another camp springs up elsewhere. This loop not only wastes taxpayers' money, but also raises questions about the sustainability of the policy. Instead of creating stability, it forces the city to live in a patchwork state, constantly tense and eroding community trust. In that context, the solution is not only in the hands of the government, but also requires the involvement of the private sector and non-profit organizations. Large corporations like Amazon or Walmart, which benefit from low-cost logistics and labor, could contribute more to housing funds or reintegration programs. Public-private partnerships not only reduce pressure on the city budget, but also contribute to rebuilding trust in a social system that is already faltering. If a city is only focused on clearing away tents and the shadows of the poor, what is it ultimately protecting? Social order, or just a superficial illusion? And if the local economy continues to be shaken by short-term policies, will we still have the strength to rebuild the lost trust? In the winter mornings of Chicago, the sight of dozens of vehicles bearing the ICE logo parked along the streets is no longer unfamiliar. People watched from their windows as tents were flattened on the streets below, belongings were swept away, and vulnerable individuals were led away like criminals. That scene exposed a painful paradox. The city wanted to demonstrate the strictness of the law, but the price to pay was the confusion and loss of the very residents of the community. Each raid is justified by a legitimate reason: enforcing federal law, controlling immigration, and restoring order to the streets. But behind that strictness are thousands of untold stories. The mother carried her young child out of the tent in the cold night. The veteran who once served his country was now quietly escorted away. Or the refugee families who had just arrived and hadn't even started before being pushed into a dead end. When humanity is weighed against the law, the question arises: what is the core of a civilized society? Laws are meant to protect order, but does that order still have meaning if it is built on fear and exclusion? Many studies have shown that coercive measures against the homeless and immigrants hardly address the root of the problem. According to a report by the National Homelessness Law Center, over 70% of cities in the US use cleanup or enforcement measures, but only 12% of them have accompanying long-term housing plans. This means that after each raid, the tents spring up again in a different location, and the cycle of despair continues. From another perspective, many supporters of a tough approach argue that if not handled firmly, the streets will become unsafe, and vices and crime will plague the community. But is it fair to lump together people who have lost their homes and jobs into the same dangerous category? When the law only sees violations, it easily forgets the human element. These are elderly people, single women, innocent children. The law protects boundaries, but humanity preserves the soul of society. Immigration and social security policies have therefore become a hot topic. On one side are federal regulations demanding strict enforcement, and on the other is pressure from the community, from witnesses, and from those calling for compassion. Cities like Chicago are therefore always in a dilemma. If they give in, they are seen as lax in law enforcement. If they are tough, they lose trust in a just and humane society. This isn't just a conflict over how things are done, but a conflict over fundamental values. Not only the government, but also the private sector can contribute to the solution. Major brands like Home Depot, which is closely associated with the construction and housing industry, could partner with affordable housing programs or support shelter improvements. When businesses participate, policy is no longer just dry words on paper, but becomes concrete and practical action for the community. Can a city call itself just if it focuses solely on enforcing the law while neglecting humanity? And if even the weakest citizens are not protected, what is the core of maintaining trust in a civilized society? Just imagine, the scene in Chicago extends beyond the city limits. ICE agent vehicles appeared on once crowded streets, tents were flattened, and people were quietly escorted away. What's happening in Chicago could be a warning for many other cities across the United States. A moment that seemed like order was restored, but behind it were lingering economic, social, and political repercussions. The question is Chicago just an isolated case, or is it a preview of a widespread trend? If you look at the national picture, the signs are clear. According to the US Department of Housing and Urban Development, (HUD), 2023 saw over 650,000 people experiencing homelessness across the United States, the highest level in over a decade. This number not only reflects the difficult situation in Chicago, but also highlights a general phenomenon: soaring housing costs, persistent inflation, and a lack of sustainable social safety net policies. Cities like Los Angeles, San Francisco, Phoenix, and even New York are all experiencing the same cycle. Increasing homelessness, strained communities, and authorities struggling between enforcement and support. Coercive policies, even if temporary, are being repeatedly implemented in many places. But a difficult-to-deny reality is, when the tents are removed from this park, they reappear just a few weeks later on another piece of land. This is proof that cleaning up cannot replace addressing the root causes. A lack of affordable housing, a lack of job opportunities, and a lack of a flexible legal system for immigrants. In Los Angeles, Skid Row has become a symbol of the cycle of homelessness, where tens of thousands of people gather in precarious conditions. In San Francisco, the Tenderloin district remains a hotspot, despite hundreds of millions of dollars spent on encampment removal programs. In Phoenix, the zone encampment once housed over 1,000 people crammed into hundreds of tents, despite numerous attempts to clear it. These examples show that Chicago is not alone, and is perhaps just a part of a larger picture of an America struggling to cope with the homelessness crisis. The key point lies in the policy. Federal law mandates strict enforcement by agencies like ICE, but at the same time, local authorities are under pressure from the community. They need to maintain order while also upholding humanity. When those two demands conflict, the result is often short-term, piecemeal, and unsustainable solutions. This raises the risk that if Chicago is seen as a model for handling this, many other cities will also fall into a similar vicious cycle. High enforcement costs, deeply divided communities, and widespread fear. It's time to look at more long-term solutions. The Housing First model, which is supported by many studies, shows that providing stable housing first, before addressing other issues such as employment and health, will help reduce overall costs and lead to more sustainable outcomes. Additionally, major companies in the real estate and construction industries, such as Home Depot, could easily participate in affordable housing development programs or support improving living conditions in shelters. The combination of public and private sectors not only eases the pressure on the city budget, but also offers hope to those on the margins of society. If Chicago today is a warning, will Los Angeles, New York, or San Francisco avoid a similar fate? And as law continues to clash with humanity in many other cities, will America have the courage to choose a path of balance rather than repeating the endless cycle of cleanup and recurrence? Perhaps never before has the image of Chicago been so contrasting. On one side is the dazzling skyline with the Willis Tower soaring high, jazz music echoing from elegant bars and million-dollar billboards flashing incessantly. But just a few turns down the street, reality reveals itself as rows of makeshift tents, lifeless eyes, and the silence of a community slowly disappearing after crackdowns. Once a proud symbol of dynamism and opportunity, the city has now become the focus of pressing questions. Does Chicago still have a future to shine once more? Historically, Chicago has risen from crises many times. After the Great Chicago Fire of 1871, the city was rebuilt and quickly became the largest industrial center in the Midwest. In the 1950s, Chicago was the heart of American manufacturing, where millions of workers found jobs and built stable lives. But now, that aura has faded. The latest figures from the US Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, show that the number of homeless people in Chicago has increased by 91% in just 1 year, reaching nearly 18,836 people. It's not just a number. It's a reminder that the city is at a turning point where social and political crises intersect. Those who once believed in Chicago's resilience are now losing patience. While enforcement measures and crackdowns may create clean spaces in the short term, they leave long-term repercussions. Communities are divided, trust is eroded, and the city's image is tarnished. Not a few residents believe that Chicago is cleaning up its appearance to hide its inability to address the root causes. And as trust in the government declines, investors, small businesses, and even ordinary citizens are caught in a spiral of uncertainty. Hope can also come from the private sector. Major brands like Home Depot, which are well established in the construction and home improvement industry, could certainly partner with the government to develop community housing models or support improvements in shelter quality. Public-private partnerships not only create additional resources, but also restore confidence that Chicago is not alone in its efforts to recover. The future of Chicago, therefore, hinges on a core question. Does the city want to be remembered as a once thriving hub, or as a symbol of 21st century failure? If humanistic values and community trust can be restored, Chicago still has a chance to shine once more. But if the policy continues to only scratch the surface, that light may forever remain just a memory. So, can a city that once rose from the ashes continue to write a new chapter for itself? And when the streets still echo with the roar of bulldozers instead of jazz music, can we still believe that Chicago will return as a symbol of opportunity and hope? Chicago, once a city that shone brightly as a symbol of opportunity, now finds itself grappling with cycles of unrest, where law and humanity have yet to find common ground. The image of spotless streets after the crackdown seems to bring order, but in reality, it only leaves a larger void. A void of trust, a void of dignity, and a void of the future. Can a city truly be revitalized if it only focuses on removing tents without rebuilding the trust of the people inside them? And as fairness and freedom gradually become a privilege, will we pass on to future generations a bright American dream or a fading memory? If you believe these stories need to be heard more, please leave your thoughts in the comments section. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to join us in our next videos, where every street corner and every story holds a greater message about the society we are building together. This video was made with the purpose of providing information and prompting reflection on social issues. All data, images, and stories presented are for reference purposes only and are not intended to be absolute statements or substitutes for official sources. We do not endorse, encourage, or assign responsibility to any individual, organization, or government. Viewers are encouraged to learn more from various sources for a more comprehensive perspective.